And greetings and welcome to the QCast. This is season 5, episode 17. And this is going to be a really fun one because we're going here to a program that's won 35 games in a row. If my math is correct, we're going to the national champions last season. And that's the NYU Violets. Meg Barber, the head women's basketball coach at NYU. Thanks so much for being willing to do the QCast. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Excited to have you. Watched your game yesterday, a 96-65 win over Merchant Marine. Um, your team is really impressive. You don't need me to tell you that, but boy, you have a talented, skilled, smart group of women. We'll get into them in detail a little bit, but it's got to feel good getting off the bus every game with this group you have, Coach. Is that
Yeah,
fair to say?
it is. I've echoed in a few pregame speeches that I feel very fortunate to be in the locker room that I'm standing in, with the group I have. So yes, definitely fortunate.
What was it? You had the ring and banner ceremony a few days ago. I think it was on the 15th. And I think it was the game against Keene.
Mhm.
Must have been pretty special. You had people come back for that. You had a great crowd. What was the environment like in the gym for that night?
Yeah, our athletic department and, the university as a whole did not disappoint with the effort they put into making sure that there was a pretty grand celebration. It's so interesting because in the moment, having won it, it just everything is like a blur,
Right.
and obviously there's no, ceremonious aspect. It's kind of just raw emotion. So it just felt very full circle to have our, the graduates come back and just have a proper, send off in a way of, thanking that team and recognizing the just insane accomplishment, that was manifested over last season. And then obviously, the NYU, that this is our second women's basketball national championship.
Right.
So Dr. Marcia Harris, one of our, illustrious alums, actually handed out the rings to
That's
each
cool.
player. And she had hit the game-winning shot in 1997 to win the national championship.
Wow.
So our players just were kind of in awe of that. And we had a lot of alums come back to celebrate. So I think that was the neatest
That's
part, just to
cool.
have, the alums, a lot of them my former teammates, and just being able to share it with the NYU community.
It's such a cool story because of course you were a great player at NYU. You scored a lot of points. I know you
Yeah,
still you
I
still
shot a
rank.
lot.
Yeah, you were a shooter, that's for sure. You're still
Yeah.
10th all time in scoring. You scored 1,228 points. You were a first team UAA player a couple times. When
Mhm.
when you got a chance to get the job, I'm just curious. Was this a no brainer when the NYU job was going to be a possibility? Was it a no brainer to pursue it, or talk about that decision that led to you pursuing it?
Yeah, so I was at the D1 level for 11 years,
Right.
and the my last stint was at Temple University, and I actually had decided to kind of potentially shift careers, and I decided to go to law school at Temple. So I left my coaching position, went to law school for a year, and I was just finishing up my first year. I was actually in the midst of writing on for law review, and I got a call from my former head coach, who is the senior women's administrator here at NYU. And she said, I just thought you'd like to know that our position, women's basketball position, is going to be open. And I honestly can tell you the second I hung up the phone, I was like, that is a one job that
Sure.
just speaks to me in terms of sort of the why of intentional, pursuit of places that fit and
Right.
jobs that fit, and kind of making this more of a career and less of a climb the ladder move. And it just felt like it would be an exciting return to the core. I definitely missed it, when I was in law school for that year.
Sure.
And just knowing the potential that a place like NYU has to climb back to the top of, the women's basketball national landscape is something that really excited me. When I was at Temple, it was in the, when sort of all of the conferences were realigning.
Right.
And so we had UConn and Louisville and Rutgers, and you're putting your hand in the circle every year, like, let's finish second. And that would be I think UConn lost in 7 years, like one game.
Right.
So it was, it definitely tested me as a coach, but it was much less of a championship pursuit mentality and more of, kind of let's see how we
Right.
can grow as a program. So just two completely different experiences. And I benefited a lot from that. And I think have really leaned into, being an alum and kind of understanding the institution here in terms of who we can recruit to and who we can attract.
This is your seventh year at NYU, correct? Is
Yeah.
this your seventh?
Yeah.
I'm just
Seventh.
curious, after being at Temple, you were at Temple from 12 to 16. You were associate head coach at William and Mary from
Mhm.
05 to 12. So you were at that D1 level for a long time. And
Yeah.
you can be a D3 person and be away from it for that long. And I would think it's got to take a while to refamiliarize yourself with the landscape. It's a very different recruiting job, I would think. It's different in terms of running the program. What was that like, kind of getting readjusted back to D3, the UAA, and NYU compared to where you'd been?
It's a great question. I think ultimately recruiting is about relationships. So that aspect of the job is very similar.
Sure.
We're certainly on paper, at the D1 level, it's like Willy Wonka with the golden ticket. It's just like, here's your
Yeah.
offer, here's your full ride, like, done. And, here there's obviously, and in the D3 landscape, depending on the institutions, financial aid is such a large part. The academic bar and sort of
Yeah.
how that works with recruiting is so different. So I was lucky to hire two incredibly, profoundly, just amazing coaches with me that first year. And we just really, I mean, recruiting was our number one priority outside of making sure we got to know the team and built those relationships. But recruiting was our, number one thing because, you
Right.
realize like you're watching game film. We were watching a Wash U. They had a player, Homily, who I think ended
Yeah.
up National Player of the Year, if not certainly first team All-American. And that was how we got ourselves up to speed with the level. Was like, who is in the top five?
Right.
How are they built? Sort of what wins, and just kind of tried to recruit to our personalities and our style from that. And obviously that is the ultimate foundation of our success is recruiting. And this tremendous talented group that we had last year, obviously,
Oh yeah.
again this year as well.
Yeah, you've got such a unique group, and just the recruiting element when you're at such a high academic institution. I think every D3 has things that make it easy to recruit to, and then things that make it tough. Every
Mhm.
D3 has that balance. From your standpoint, all the UAA schools this applies to, but you do have such a unique academic requirement. I'm just curious, to have you talk about that side of it a little more. Is you can't just get a list of the best girls players in America and just start saying, let's go recruit them. What is that like to have to qualify the grades and find just the women and girls that fit NYU's profile?
Yeah, it's we've referred to it as needle in a haystack, and have we have no shortage of people that are interested in playing for this program, right? Like a lot of, talented players that will reach out via email and a
Sure.
lot of players that certainly can play at the Division III college level. But we're obviously looking for sort of that next tier. I would say some of the sort of greats we've had over the years are players that had D1 offers and decided academically
Sure.
this just fit them better than what those offers or maybe even what that lifestyle would be like in terms of, summer and, the requirements to be on campus versus here we're really invested in study abroad and summer internships in New York City. And, so we're definitely recruiting to the academic side first and foremost, because that's the biggest draw. If we just tried to recruit to
Right.
basketball and you compared D1 basketball maybe to this program, 80% of the time, those programs might be a little bit stronger, or, you could think about playing pro and it might be a little bit easier,
Right.
so it definitely is the whole holistic, viewpoint of trying to match the strengths of NYU with the strengths of the recruits. And I can tell you, I think we benefit in terms of, we have a lot of students here. We can cast a really wide net. There's
Sure.
not an area that's hard to get to New York City from. I mean, we pretty much have a
Right.
direct flight to anywhere. So, even internationally. So I think that has helped us. I think if we were trying to recruit regionally to this academic niche, it would be just almost impossible. And so
Right.
we were able to recruit around the country, and our staff is out, all year long looking for the top talent. So it's tiring, but it's gotten the job done, and we've just had these incredible. I mean, our team had a 3.69 GPA
Wow.
last year. So they're excelling in the classroom, and obviously, we've had quite a bit of success in the basketball side.
Uh, I'm curious is to just kind of zooming out a little bit on where you see the women's game right now in Division III. I was thinking about this over the weekend. I graduated from Illinois Wesleyan in 1993. It was really a men's basketball dominated sport scene, and women's basketball was up and coming, but I mean, it wasn't, it just wasn't where the men's program was. It was apples and oranges. And then I was thinking, I was watching this weekend, I was watching us play Calvin and then Hope on the women's side, just watching the high level of basketball and watching Illinois Wesleyan play Hope, just thinking like, compare this to when I was in school. I
Yeah.
mean, you played in the early 2000s at NYU.
Yeah.
How would you articulate that development of the women's game from back then to where we are today, Coach?
So I think, it's interesting because a lot of the alums are like, how would we do against your current team? And I'm like, we would get annihilated. It
Right,
would not
right,
be, we would just be one of the statistics of schools that, I mean, we would not even be competitive, although we thought we were really, really good, right?
right.
And, I went to a couple of Elite Eights. We had some really talented players. We had, first team All-Americans. And so I would say there's like few and far between. There's a few players that maybe could like be on this team, but you're right. The access to women's basketball, both visually on TV, the growth of the club, girls basketball scene at an earlier ages has just exploded. I think the development of, girls basketball, and it certainly is not just a moment, right? We felt like this movement, for really the last, I would say, we're getting 5 to 10 years in, and this is kind of getting to like one of what feels like one of the peaks of the women's basketball movement, and it's really neat to see. I think we have players in our program that. I mean, the New York City media was all over our team last year, and they just, our
Sure.
players like could not even fathom that
Right.
was like, they want to interview us. They're going to put us on, local this, local that in New York City, and people, walking down the street in New York and having people yell out like, good luck at your game was just like unheard of. So, the athleticism, to your point, it just doesn't hold a candle to where it is today. And it's just a really exciting time. But you're seeing it across all levels. I
Yeah.
mean, and certainly now with the WNBA as well.
And speaking of WNBA, I mean, just that like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and everyone that's come before them that's built up to this. I went to watch our men's team play an exhibition against Butler at Hinkle Fieldhouse, and Caitlin Clark was at the game. She has ties to
Yeah.
the Butler coaching staff, and I got to thinking,
Yeah.
I'm thinking the most popular basketball player in the world is sitting over in the section over here. I literally think she's the most popular basketball player. What's like the impact of Caitlin Clark and all of the others that kind of led up to this moment? What have they done for the game, Coach?
Continuing to be visible. And again, I think Sue Bird and, some of the, companies that she's been involved in have really just continued to push down these barriers of, include the women's side and, have it on ESPN and
Right.
let the WNBA, the WNBA Players Association opting out of contract negotiations and, continuing to just push for better opportunities to be on TV. I mean, Caitlin Clark would not be this famous if not for
Yeah.
ESPN.
Right.
And, wouldn't it could be very much Iowa, she could be really famous, but to your point, she is a
Yeah.
national brand,
Right.
and really almost a global brand. So I just think those players that sort of first knocked down those barriers. I mean, the
Right.
the '96 Olympic team, I remember as a kid seeing them on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and I like ran home and got together every dollar I had saved to buy the Sports Illustrated episode, because you just never saw a women's basketball team on the cover. So I think again, it's been happening for decades, but we've now in the social media movement and all these opportunities to just have these players be more visible. They are also, I mean, Caitlin Clark is working around the clock, it seems,
Right.
to, be in places and be the brand that she is. So I think she's pulling her end as well.
In terms of your start in the game, I believe that your father was your first basketball coach. Would you just talk a little bit about like the role that your dad played in you kind of becoming a hooper?
Yeah, he coached our local, like he started a girls program for fifth and sixth grade girls, and my sister was in sixth grade. And he let me kind of just tag along to those practices. I was in second grade. And I was thinking about this the other day, actually, because I was thinking about him and sort of like what was a little bit different about how him and I developed this relationship with basketball and with each other. And thinking about all the games he brought me to, they were like the local varsity girls basketball games. It wasn't like, I'm going to just keep taking you to the men's games,
Yeah.
and then you can translate this when you get to your modified seventh grade team or whatever
Right.
that was. I mean, we went around the region, and he exposed me to some of the better just girls varsity local
Sure.
talent. And then I was fortunate, I mean, besides just coming home from work and getting shots up with me and things like that, he brought me to an AAU program at the time. Before sort of there were all these regional teams, he brought me to a team in Albany, the American Eagles, and it was players from all around the city.
Cool.
So I mean, I grew up in I was one blinking stoplight small town, so I was exposed to a higher level of basketball, which obviously opened doors to places like NYU, and just kind of having an opportunity in the sport of basketball outside of the smallness of my town.
That's really cool. I have a 13, I guess she's not so little anymore, 13-year-old niece that's been a hooper since she was like 4 years old. And there's just so many places now for a little girl to
Yeah,
play. And
yeah,
and I just don't know that it was always that way, like when I was growing up. So it's really cool to see kind of where this has developed.
yeah.
Wanted to ask you about defense a little bit because I was looking at your statistic last year. You guys went 31-0. So whenever someone goes 31-0, a season box score is going to look crazy. But on the defensive side, you guys gave up 53 points a game. Opponents shot .337, and opponents had 322 assists to 522 turnovers. I can't think that I've ever seen a season box score defensively that looks like that. I'm just curious, not that you're going to give away trade secrets here, but I know it starts with having like getting off with the bus with the best defensive players, but talk about just ingraining defense in your program, Meg, because those are astounding defensive numbers.
Yeah, I mean, obviously what you said, we have the players that can play to this high intensity level of defense that we're demanding. And I'm really big on leading with defense. So in all of our, preseason and talking to the team, you're not going to see the floor if you're a one-way player, and if you're only want to play on the offensive side. So some of
Sure.
our better offensive players have actually turned into some of the best defensive players, just knowing that that's how they're going to see the floor. And our roster is very competitive. I think that also really helps. So when we're, scrimmaging in practice, and, whether it's ODO or just half court possessions, I think we're just constantly putting pressure on each other in terms of that skill level, which has really helped players actually develop. I think that's a piece of college
Sure.
basketball. It's like people want instant success, and it's like To your point of the growth of the sport, coming in from high school and hitting one of the top D3 programs in general, that physicality, the speed, the understanding of angles,
Yeah.
understanding how to get through screens, that is a lot to teach. And we've had players that pick it up really quickly. We've had others that need time, but at least are like training in that mode of again, just not being a one-sided player. But I mean, on top of that, certainly over the last 4 years, I think last year we really didn't have many weaknesses in terms of,
Right.
post guard defense, but Natalie Bruns and Belle Pellecchia are just unicorns. I mean, Bruns reach to get from,
Right.
we were playing a game last year and she was in the paint and the player went to take a three right in front of me. I was on the sideline and she blocked it. And I just was like, I don't think I've ever seen that in the women's game ever, from the paint to the 3-point line, blocking a shot. So her shot blocking ability without fouling is almost unheard of at our level. And then Belle is just this warrior. I mean, people talk about players running through a wall. She would run through 10 at a time. I mean, she
Right.
just there's no quit in her, and she hawks the ball, and just she's a 3-time UAA Defensive Player of the Year so
Right.
far. So I mean, we're those two pieces, outside of anything coaching wise, have certainly really led to those statistics.
That's where I wanted to go next is your personnel, because this isn't one of those years where you returned everybody. You actually
Hmm.
lost really key pieces off your team last year. I believe you lost Morgan Morrison, left that team
Hmm.
last year, Megan Bauman, Erica Miller. And so what the piece that you did return, among many others, actually, let's start with Natalie Bruns, who you just talked about. She's a 6'1" forward, 14.7 rebounds, 4 assists last year. She shot 538 from the field. She was the D3hoops.com player of the year. She's every, I don't know, couple decades, maybe you have a Natalie Bruns, but she's a pretty special player, Meg. Just talk a little bit more about kind of what she does for you and the team and the program.
She is she is a much more impressive person than anything else. She's one of the most mature and intellectual and just high performing people I've ever been around in my life. I mean, people walk away from her, alums, donors, you name it, and it feels like you're just talking to a 30-year-old. So her maturity, I think, has helped her in, her first year was a COVID year. So her
Right.
sophomore year was, as a rookie, she had NYU had we never even opened the doors to our gym. So even the body composition of
Wow.
our athletes was kind of diminished in a way. And she just like really leaned into the weight room, leaned into, so she's not a player that has said like, I'm here, I'm so good. She just is always deferring to other people. I think, statistically, people can look at her stats. She could average 30 and 20 if she was, in that mindset of,
Right.
I have to, dominate, the shot count and things like that. But she's more selfless than one. I've actually talked to her this year, like, we need you to be more selfish because you're that good and we really need you to attract multiple defenders. But she is really off the charts with, like you said, her production. Over the summer, I coach USA basketball, the U17 team, and I got into a lot of the statistical analysis of both the USA basketball players and then also a lot of the top international opponents. And the guys that were talking to me about how the system worked to look into the analytics actually were like, okay, we took your team, and just so you know, Natalie Bruns is in like unicorn level. The only other
Sure.
player in with this production in a collegiate season is Caitlin Clark.
That's
So it was
amazing.
her and Caitlin Clark, and they were above, like, 2 percentage points higher than anybody in the country. And I think that speaks to, like, regardless of what division or what level
Yeah.
people think people play at, the consistency of production, and just as a coach being able to rely on that is, so clutch when you're, really trying to build
Right.
a championship team.
You mentioned Belle Pellecchia. Last year, she averaged 11.7 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, like elite, incredible defender. Um,
hmm
uh, this year, you also returned Carolyn Pepper, and
hmm
she's playing a big role for you this year. You've had a couple people that are also playing big roles off the bench this year. So Mary
hmm
Kate Fahey is having a
hmm
good season through 4 games, and Alexia Musarulis. Thank you for
hmm
helping me say
Yeah.
that right. You just have this really deep team. Brooke Batchelor, Jamie Behar. Talk a little bit, if you would, about kind of the depth of the team, because people thought coming in, hey, they lose a lot, but you've been
hmm
able to just plug people in and just it looks fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting 40 points per game right now off our bench.
Right,
So you named it. I mean, I think this is definitely the deepest team that I've ever coached here. Part of that was as we got more successful and, these higher level recruits that were really interested in coming here, and kind of more high level recruits
right,
than, kind of having classes where it's like one or two that are, going to be kind of those all conference level players. So, and Jamie Behar, transferring in from Lehigh, had a lot of experience, just playing at a higher level, and has come in here and really delivered.
right.
Carolyn Pepper is, essentially even last year, she played starter minutes. I found her firepower off the bench to be
Right.
something that I always love to have a player coming off the bench that is essentially a starter. Because I think if you don't have, kind of that punch off the bench, if your starters come out flat, you're in a bit of trouble. And then Brooke Batchelor was hurt all last season, so no one has seen her. She's technically a sophomore, but she is, definitely contributing to the
Yeah.
same defensive, and just her athleticism and speed is really helping us. So I think this is probably the deepest team we've had. Although to your point, we look very different from
Yeah.
Morgan Morrison and Megan Bauman and that group.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty impressive to think all the pieces that have just been elevated, someone that comes in and all of a sudden it's this cohesive team that's just a
Yeah,
juggernaut. Just a couple more questions for you. I appreciate all of your time. The
of course.
UAA, obviously always one of the best leagues in Division 3 in any sport. Last year you guys amazingly run the table. That is really hard to do. 14
Yeah.
and 0. WashU 10-4, Emory 9-5, Chicago 9-5. That was the top four. What's your outlook this year? Obviously, you know that teams have reloaded in the UAA. You've got new players coming in. How do you look at the conference race this year?
I think this is the strongest women's basketball UA conference we've had also since I've been here. The WashU, I thought last year, I told people, I said, if they can make the tournament and get the right matchups, I
Right,
thought we might find them in the Final Four. I mean, they were just that talented, and some of their talent was younger, and I think that was probably the biggest difference between us and them is we had old talent and they had young talent. And so some of their losses and just some of the experience that they didn't have ended up kind of affecting them a little bit more. And then, that put them in a much tougher race in terms of the NCAA tournament because they didn't have the same
right.
resume, but they are wildly talented. I mean,
Yeah.
Lexi Harris is definitely one of the best post players in the country. Jess Brooks came back. Their guard play is tremendous. And Lisa Stone taking over there is, also a tremendous
Yeah.
coach. Carnegie Mellon has a new coach, and they're off to a hot start. So I think the coaching in the league is fantastic. I think the league is just a lot deeper this year, which always helps to have those back to back tough tests. I
Oh, yeah.
think that was the thing that probably prepared us best for the NCAA tournament is just having to play these
Right.
UA juggernauts on the weekends and getting through two tough opponents.
Yeah. I think coming from a great league like that, when you play those kind of games every weekend, like you guys do, in that challenging, like Friday, Sunday setup, you get into
Yeah,
the NCAA tournament and you're not playing teams better than what you've seen. You're
yeah,
playing teams that are like the top of the UAA, and that's a
yeah,
huge advantage.
yeah.
Last question, then I'll ask if there's anything we didn't cover and how you would close us out. But in terms of this season, again, 35 wins in a row, 31 last year. Now you're 4-0. That's 35. You're ranked number one. Um, does it, I mean, the way you impact or the way you approach this season, Meg, with I don't want to call it the target on your back or whatever, but you're expected to win every game you play. And that's a strange position to be in, as opposed to a team that trots out there and sometimes is an underdog and we can do this. And how does that approach how you approach your team at all? The fact that, where you're sitting at
Yeah.
35 in a row and number one?
Yeah, it's definitely an unfamiliar place. I definitely have more of an underdog mentality. I think, and I in some ways kind of always look at our team that way, in a sense of like what are our weaknesses and what could take us out and what would really hurt, and trying to address some of that stuff like earlier in the season. Last year, I don't think many teams zoned us, but we were prepping literally just for, do we meet transy again? Is that a thing that
Sure.
actually could happen? And, we weekly were, instituting, just opportunities to get better at that. And that definitely helped us, when it actually did
Right.
end up. But it is, I'm very much one game at a time. I think being undefeated last year was never a goal, was never something that we even talked about. Once you get, the only time that I care about being undefeated is the NCAA tournament.
Right.
So, I think a lot of times you can learn, obviously more from a loss and just kind of refocusing your group. But we had such a business-like group. There wasn't like a concern, like, are we winning too much? Are we
Right.
too big-headed? They were so focused on getting the job at hand done every single night, and just knowing the UAA and not overlooking any opponents is, I think, sort of the trait that led to that. Because I think the UAA is probably the hardest thing to go 14 and
Right.
0. I mean,
Yeah.
that accomplishment is almost more impressive than a 6-0 NCAA tournament run,
Yeah.
just because you're in the home gyms of those teams, and the travel in between,
Right.
and all of that goes into it. So, I told the team when I took the job, I said, all the teams in New York that are hated, the Yankees, and you look at New England with the Patriots and their run, it just means that you're winning a lot and doing things the right way.
Yep.
Like, it's hard to point to things. So, in that way, we welcome the target. But I did tell the team, we played MIT in our first game this year, and we had opened with them last year, and I haven't even watched our national championship game back. Like,
Wow.
it was like, I thought it was one of our worst games of the year, and credit to Smith for how they defended us. But I went back and watched our MIT game from last year, and it was the first time I was watching our team without like the eyes of a critic, right? The eyes of a coach that is hoping that, like, what do we need to work on? How do we need to get better? And when I started watching that game from last year, I said, wow, we were really we were really good. Like, I don't think I even realized in the moment how good we were. But again, it's just so different being in a coach's seat and
Right.
watching your team. You're just focused on different things, than a record or, the score of the game.
Well, in that Smith game, I think you scored what, 41, or they scored 41 points. So defense, the,
Defense, there you
the
go.
defense, like
There
you
you
only need
go.
to score 42 to win it. You scored
Yeah.
51, 51, 41.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would just say, Coach, I mean, incredible job here in year 7 of building this thing to this point and watching your team play. I just, like yesterday, the opening tip is like win the tip, pass, layup. I'm like, it's just kind of like a machine looking team, but a team that seems to have fun playing together. I selfishly hope that my Illinois Wesleyan Titans play you this year, because it would mean that we've had a good year. I think we're ranked 10. Maybe when the thing comes out next, we might be 4, 5, 6. And so that I'm secretly hoping for a matchup. I think that would be super cool.
They're very talented. I saw them on film last year and was like, wow, I actually hope
Yeah.
they stay on a bracket that does not involve us.
They got beat at Wartburg in a tough game. It's
Yeah.
one of those, how like these things swing is they lost their conference championship game. Had they won it, they'd be hosting. You
Right.
lose that, you get sent to Waverly, Iowa, playing
Yeah.
against the stud players. So no, they're really good. Like they're maybe undersized a little bit, but they're a bunch of hoopers and they're athletes and they just get after it. So I hope we can play you. Fingers
Yeah.
crossed, long way to go. But
Yeah.
Meg, Barber, I really appreciate this. And we're gonna have some NYU folks tuning in. We're gonna have D3 Nation tuning in. What would you like to leave everyone with here on the QCast today?
Well, I mean, first of all, again, thanks for having me. And part of what you're talking about with the rise of women's basketball is just people like yourself and D3 Hoops investing and just, using resources to invest in the women's side, and the D3 side, which is, can't be understated. I think the biggest credit to where our program has gotten, honestly, is the other coaches that I've had to coach against. And, hearing you talk about the Elite Eights, and we had to go on the road and play at Hope against Brian Morehouse's group when they won the
Yeah,
national championship. And then the next year we went on the road at Transy and we played against Julie's group and they won the national championship. And we were like, we need to host this thing. We need to be a little bit more in the
absolutely.
driver's seat, for this round. And our players to this day, Belle Pellecchia was in that Hope game, Natalie Bruns, and they point to that game as what made them realize how good,
Sure.
women's basketball on the D3 level could be, because they were that same machine level program, just, kind of taking it to us. And we held our own for a while, but they were ultimately just, too deep and too experienced kind of at that point. So it's really a credit to all of the coaches that I've had the honor to coach against in our league and in these NCAA tournament heated moments. And I'm looking forward to another season, and to the NYU community, thank you for all your support, and looking forward to seeing everybody on the sidelines here.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I had Julie on last year. She was on early in the season, and just the perspective on the women's side right now is just off the chart. So I don't
Yeah.
know, something about it just seems there's just an equal or a little more layer of like perspective around
Yeah.
than maybe even on the men's side. I can't even put my finger on that, but I appreciate it, Meg. Like what you're doing is amazing. We'll be rooting for you, except during the Illinois Wesleyan game. Whenever that happens, got my green
Hopefully,
on.
yeah, hopefully that's way down the
It would have
road.
to be. It would have to be pretty darn deep into that thing. Let me
Yeah.
tell you. So,
Yeah.
folks, that's Meg Barber. That was QCast season 5, episode 17. Catch the NYU Violets, who have now racked up 35 wins in a row. I don't know if there's any end in sight to that. So let's see how they keep it rolling. Meg, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Bob.